All right, well, it is just after 3, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome everybody today. I'm so glad that you're able to join us this afternoon. We have a great webinar set for you, Telling Your Environmental Story with Esri Story Maps. And contrary to what it says on your screen, I'm not Katie Navin. I am Lisa Edens. I am the program coordinator for the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education. And if you're not familiar with CAEE, we are a network of environmental education providers who are working together in Colorado to advance environmental education by fostering collaboration, mobilizing support, and driving excellence. And so one of the ways that we hope we're driving excellence is through our monthly webinar series. And so we try to pick topics and bring in speakers and presenters who we think have interesting topics and information to present to help elevate environmental education and the practice and the teaching that we all do across the state. So I'm so excited to welcome Joseph Kerski today. But before we get started, I wanted to take care of a couple housekeeping things. One is that we're on the Zoom platform. And I'm not sure if folks are familiar with Zoom. Hopefully you are. But if you're not, it's very easy to use. It's everybody should be in mute mode at the moment. And so in order to communicate, the best way is through the chat function. And you can find that at the bottom of your screen. So you can share chats with everyone or just with me. Hopefully you're not having any technical difficulties, but if you are, you can let me know. Otherwise, feel free to chat in your questions. I will be monitoring the chat for Joseph and probably holding questions to the end. But if there's a burning question somebody has, I can probably pass it along to him. So make sure to use that function as you wish. And another thing I wanted to mention before we move on is that I am recording the webinar today. And so I will have a follow-up email with the recorded webinar, as well as information on our upcoming webinars. We've got a great series all the way. I've got things scheduled all the way through fall. So next month, Katie Navin, our executive director, is going to be talking on the K through 12 guidelines for excellence in EE. And then in June, we have a webinar around the GoCo Generation Wild campaign. And then in July, it'll be about our certification and answering questions about that. So we have a great lineup, and I'll share that again through email. And then finally, I'm just going to ask that you are able to give us some feedback on our webinar today so that we can continue to improve the webinars that we host. So without further ado, let me introduce our awesome speaker today, Joseph Kerski. Joseph is a geographer with a focus on the use of geographic information systems, or GIS, in education. He has served geographers in 4 major sectors of society, including government, academia, private industry, and nonprofit organizations, and has worked for organizations such as NOAA, the U.S. Census Bureau, the USGS. He's a professor at the University of Denver. He's worked for the American Association of Geographers and is currently with Esri. Joseph has authored over 75 chapters and articles on geographic information systems, education, physical and cultural geography, mathematics, fieldwork, teaching and learning, and related topics, and makes frequent presentations at conferences and university campuses. He is active in conducting professional development training for primary and secondary educators, and has authored or co-authored 7 books. And most recently, he gave a presentation on the whys of where at TEDx in Vail. So without further ado, let me pass it on to Joseph.
Greetings. Thank you, Lisa. Much appreciated. Hi, folks. Good to have you aboard here today. We're going to have a grand time with story maps. Just to review our goals today, the idea of story maps, it's multimedia web maps. And so you and your students or your constituents, the people visiting your nature center, etc., can explore environmental issues with these story maps. You can integrate audio, video, narrative, text, etc. And you can study things from local to global, as I have shown on the screen here. Ocean currents, natural hazards, and so on. Okay, so that's our goal for today. We've got an action-packed time together. So tell your friends, as Lisa said, she's recording this, so you can tell your colleagues about this. Also, I've got way more slides and activities today than we're going to have time to actually do in our webinar. So that said, that's another reason for you to actually go into the slides and the activities, which I'll indicate at the end where these are actually stored online, okay? Now, to save precious bandwidth, I'm going to stop my video, but I will be with you all, and I just want to do that for a moment here. So let's do this. Katie and Lisa have got a poll that I would like to have them. I'm going to stop share so that Lisa can do that. So I want to get a sense of who has used an Esri story map before. Now you may wonder, what is Esri? Well, we actually have quite a bit in common with CAEE. We both have environmental in our name, but we more importantly have Environmental Systems Research Institute, the Colorado Association for Environmental Education, or Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education. But the idea is that we both are very focused on how and why to teach environmental ed. Now, our mission at Esri is, how do we help people think spatially and use some geotechnology tools, I'll explain more about that in a bit, effectively in education. So a piece of that is this thing called story map. So if you could just fill this out here, have you ever used a Esri story map in the past for teaching, for learning, for research, for fun? Have you ever used one? And then secondly, have you ever actually created one? We're going to do both of those today in the webinar. So we'll keep that dangling before you, that we don't want to just use it. We actually want you to make these as well. Okay, very cool. So some of you have used, okay, about half and half, just about, and then created. Nobody has created one, which is fine. This is an introductory type of a workshop, and I've talked to Lisa and the fine folks at CAEE about maybe at some point in the future we can do sort of an intermediate level once people get familiar with the platform. And as you'll see, it's all fairly intuitive, so I don't think you'll have any problem getting rolling with this, okay? So I'm going to stop the video just for, again, saving some bandwidth here. And I'm also going to go to a set of activities. This is what we've got on the agenda for today. Again, we're not going to get to all of this. The idea is to get you familiar with what are story maps and also how to use them in your own environmental ed work, okay? So the introduction to this is that, again, as I mentioned, these are simple web mapping applications, or web apps for short, that combine interactive multimedia content to tell your story. They're hosted by our organization, Esri, in the cloud, but you can also put them on your own website. We'll talk more about that later. Also, the nice thing about these, especially for educators and people that have limited time, you don't have a full-time ed tech role, right? You've got lots of plates juggling in the air, and so the nice thing is that these incorporate these builder functions like you see in other sets of tools, digital tools. So step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Next, next, next. Finish, done. That's the idea of these builder functions. You can also customize these story maps. More about that in a bit. They work equally well on different devices, so they're optimized for someone pulls up your story map, or if you pull up somebody else's story map on a phone or a tablet or a laptop. It's all good. It's all good, folks. There are hundreds of thousands of these story maps. This is actually, this bar, as you can see, is about a year old. There are about 500,000 story maps now. The way that story maps got started, is just a 30-second sort of history for you, is that Alan Carroll, one of our colleagues here at Esri, was the chief cartographer at National Geographic, and he said, I'm getting to the end of my career here at National Geographic, and I really have this great idea for multimedia maps. And we said, Alan, that's a great idea, and we've loved you and known you for years. Come on over to Esri. We'll give you a staff, and here's the platform, and just run with it. So Alan and his team made basically a story map every week for about 2 years, and that was all good, and many of those are still online, many of which I use actually in teaching. But the more exciting thing, folks, is that the user community, educators and health professionals and transportation engineers and city planners and you name it, every industry under the sun started using these to tell their own story and to teach and learn from. So that's why I and my colleagues on the education team with me, and we have about 15 people on our team. The goal of our team is, again, to help educators at all levels, all over the world, in multiple disciplines, be empowered using geotechnology. What is geotechnology? Well, web mapping, story mapping is part of it. Geographic information systems is part of it. Remote sensing, looking at the Earth from space, is a part of it. And also global positioning systems is a part of geotechnologies. So why story maps? Well, again, you don't have to be a geographic information systems specialist or any sort of web developer or even know about coding to create one of these. All right, now that you've kind of got a little toe into the waters of what these things are, let's look at a couple of examples. And I'd like to do that by giving you a short tour of our apps. And these are the different kinds of story maps that exist. So here's an example of a map tour. We're actually going to build this today in the 3 hours that we have together. Just kidding, just kidding. We don't have 3 hours. I just want to make sure you folks are on your toes. No, we just have a short time together, but we will have time to build one of these map tours. So you can see the map tour has a larger image associated with certain points or lines or polygons on the live interactive web map. And it also has a carousel, so you can navigate with the images or you can navigate on the map to the content that you wish. As you can see here, hopefully you'll be able to see this okay. This is a story map, a story map that the San Luis Obispo Police Department put together to say, hey, here's the officers that are safeguarding your community, and let's get to know them. They actually are real people, they have families, etc., and these are the districts that they actually work in. So it was a way for the city to introduce the people of the city to their police force. Okay, here's a map journal. The way the map journals came around is James Fallows, a couple years ago, from the Atlantic Journal, that you may be familiar with, came to us here at Esri and said, hey, I love these story maps, but we need the ability for journalists and others to put more narrative in there, to put more text in there. So unlike the map tour, which basically points to one single interactive web map, a map journal is a lot more powerful. As you can see here, this is a story map on the age of the Anthropocene, right? The age of humans. And this is actually a really good example of a story map you could use for environmental ed, because it has a series of web maps that are interactive. Okay, so that is a map journal. It can point to multiple web maps. Now here is a map series. It has its name because it's got tabs, as you can see, exploring America's natural landscape. Tabs across the top with different themes, for example. In this case, landforms, land use, land cover, etc., climate, vegetation. So as you can see, these can be quite useful for lots of different purposes in environmental education. I really like the ability to do this swiping and spyglass type of effect. You may have seen these on the web in the past, and you may hopefully be excited that today what I'm saying is you can build one of these. So sometimes you've seen maps that have a sort of a squeegee effect that goes across the map, and you can drag that squeegee from left to right. And on the left side, you might have land use, and on the right side, you might have land cover. You might have precipitation on one side, and the other side, you might have frost-free days. You know, it could be different themes on the left or the right, or it could be different years. It could be your town 2018, your town aerial photo 1950. So you're having students and others look at changes over space and time with these. So really quite exciting. This one's called the short list story map, and so named because it's got this short list of little thumbnail images, and as you pan and zoom the map, that content that's on the left side changes. Now I'm showing you some examples, but I'm hoping you're thinking about, thinking outside the box here. It doesn't have to be California colleges. It could be tree species on my nature center or on my school campus or on my university campus. See what I mean? It could be anything in these things. Yeah, excellent. And there's more, folks. There's one called the Cascade, which gives you that effect of scrolling through, as you've probably seen on numerous web pages nowadays. You scroll through in an immersive kind of effect. This also is one that I wanted to show because this highlights the fact that you can use 3D scenes in these story maps, as I'll demonstrate here in a bit. This one is about the Syrian refugees. It uses a 3D scene with some really nice cartography in it. But that is one of the story map types called the Cascade. There's also one called crowdsource. And in the courses, for example, that I've taught through enetlearning.org, usually the first week of the online course for educators is, okay, put a spot on the map where your favorite landform is, or your favorite place to visit, or where are you from, where's your school, that type of thing. So it's crowdsource. And so picture, again, thinking outside the boundaries here, folks. What if you made a crowdsource map and your students actually collected data on every single tree species, or every single piece of trash, every single broken sidewalk, etc., on your campus or in your nature center? You could also, for those of you that are in nature centers, you could use this to map every single piece of infrastructure, all the light poles, all the trash bins, the recycle centers, the places where you found frogs or amphibians, etc., right? So there's a crowdsource ability too. Okay, gosh, I wish I could get excited about this, Lisa. This is great stuff here, folks. So hopefully you're getting psyched about, yeah. Okay, so enough showing slides for the moment. Let me show you the Story Maps gallery for just a moment. And I encourage you sometime over the next few days, ideally, if not the next few weeks, to go through and just take a look at this Story Maps gallery. So storymaps.arcgis.com. Maybe Lisa could type that into the chat box. storymaps.arcgis.com. Now, this is a gallery of sort of not the Story Maps greatest hits, but more of in the way of, let's show a variety of story maps, let's show different scales, let's show different themes. So something to think about at some point in the future is way at the bottom of this gallery, it says, hey, do you want to see your story map featured in here? Submit yours. So at some point in the future, you or your students, maybe you make some really interesting thing that nobody else has made, and you want to feature it in the gallery. So you can actually submit that, and then our Story Maps team will consider posting it on this site here. So in brief, I highly encourage you to do that over the next few weeks, days ideally, because you know how it is. Every time you go to a session like this, and I've been there in your shoes, it's like, if it's several months down the road, what did Joseph talk about way back in April? So refresh your memory soon after the webinar ends. Now, there's two different ways to browse this gallery. You can browse by app type, and you may wonder, what does Joseph mean by an app type? Well, this is the thing that we were just going through, the map journal, the map series, the map tour, etc. So you can, if one of those looks really appealing, you could browse by that type, but you can also go by subject or what we call industry. So just taking the subject, what if we looked at disasters and humanitarian, or maybe more germane to this webinar, nature and conservation. So if we look at nature and conservation, for example, one of the ones in there is the Sustainable Development Goals. Hey, I know most of you are familiar with this from the United Nations. So we made a story map out of that to help students understand what these are, and also to help the general public understand what these are. And you can see here that you can put graphics like we have here in this particular story map, but also, since it's a map tool, right, you'd be surprised if there were no maps. And indeed, there are some maps. So let's say we wanted to look at the goal 1, no poverty. So we looked at different selected countries and looked at the so-called poverty gap. Okay, and then what do we know about poverty? So there's some text on the right side here, and you can see that you can scroll with these little dots on the right hand side between different data sets here. So this is a map journal, kind of a story map, but it's about the Sustainable Development Goals. So if you're teaching about that, rather than just showing a bunch of text, why not show a story map about the SDGs? Awesome. Let's go back to the gallery because I want to show you one more in here, and that is the River Reborn. This is the Elwha River. This is the story of, and again, this is story maps, right? So you got to think about, if you're going to create these, what kind of story do I want to tell? This one's about the removal of 2-century-old dams. One of the technical nice things about this is that you can see, I'm not sure what the bandwidth is on your end, but hopefully you're seeing some fish swimming around in the Elwha River. But you can loop a video in these story maps. So again, lots of capabilities here. This is a cascade story map with a little bit of a twist, as I'll talk about in a moment. But the cascade, you've got this immersive feel to it. So I can scroll through and see, okay, why were the dams removed? How were they removed? What's the impact on the watershed after these dams were removed? What were the political, the legalities, and other forces that acted? And this also is a nice one because it incorporates those 3D scenes like we talked about. And so each one of these interactive maps, right, they are truly interactive. They're not static slides. So right here, I can actually go into some of the content in the story map itself, okay? So, nice. Okay, so that is the story of the River Reborn. Another one that I wanted to show is, hey, more close to home, my colleague Esther Worker and I are in the Colorado office. We're up in Broomfield at the Esri office. We've got, again, 13 colleagues scattered around the country and indeed around the world, all with the same goal of helping you all be confident in using these tools. But we love Colorado, as I know probably most of you on this webinar are in Colorado, so I thought I'd show this one. This was about Colorado rivers. So if you want to show the students not just where the rivers are located, what this wet map that I kind of scrolled by, but also looking at the river health according to certain factors. Now, each one of these maps is created by an individual or an organization. And one of the things that we're really passionate about, as I know you are as educators, is we want the students to not just accept any map or any image or any piece of text that's up on the internet, right? We want them to be critical consumers of data. So each one of these story maps, ideally, now it's crowdsourced, so you get a whole wide variety of content, right? Anybody can create a story map. So, but what I'm getting at is, where did this come from? Who created it? So in this particular one, I like it because at the bottom, it's got all the photo credits. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Hey, can my students use any image online? No. So it's a good introduction to helping your students understand what they can use, what they cannot use, etc. But the nice thing about this one is that it gives you all of the sources for the story map, okay? And so this particular one, it's from conservationcolorado.org, and it gives you all the sources that they used along with web links to all the sources. So again, fostering that whole idea of let's be critical of the data. Just because it's a piece of content online doesn't mean I can trust it. Just because it's a map doesn't mean I can trust it, right? Maps have this air of sort of being authoritative, but in this age of being crowdsourced, you can have a whole wide variety of content quality is what I'm getting at. So story maps are a nice way to teach about that, okay? So let's go back. Let me check in with Lisa. Lisa, any burning questions at this point?
I don't see any across the chat box, so I think we're good.
All right, good. Hopefully nobody's asleep. Hello, anybody out there? It's all good. Okay, so what I usually do to introduce this is put on your educator hats here for a moment. I usually introduce this topic by just doing what I did with you all, but I give them usually in a live face-to-face setting. I have the students or faculty that I'm working with or whoever it is spend a few minutes on that map gallery. Obviously, in a webinar, we're not going to spend any more time on that map gallery, that story map gallery, but I usually have them say, okay, pick something that's of interest to you and then be prepared to tell your colleagues, your peers, your fellow faculty, your fellow students why this is interesting, and or if you're a faculty member, why you might be able to use this in your own instruction or research. Okay, so there's a wide variety of ways of communicating with maps, and the nice thing about story maps, folks, is that this is tapping into the whole power that maps have had for centuries, really, right? To teach, to convey information, right? To convey a large amount of information in a small space, whether that space was in the past paper, film, etc. And before that, right, stone tablets, wood blocks, etc. But now maps are really powerful. They're ever, more present online. And so there are lots of ways to communicate with maps, story maps being one way to do it. Now, let me just show you something called a presentation mode, which is related to story maps and another thing that you might want to build. The reason why I like showing it is because it's simple. Don't overthink this. You basically get a live web map with some text in it. And so this is one of my favorite topics, why geographic information systems matters to education and society. So I can skip between different content like biodiversity loss, etc. So this is just a slide, if you will, but notice that it's tied to an interactive web map. So if I look at, for example, teaching about a certain toxic spill, I'm going to zoom there and I can see a little thumbnail, and you can see that the map is still interactive. You can see that the base map in this case is changed to the National Geographic base. But I can go through these one by one and look at coastal erosion, for example, in Kent, England. So that is a presentation that I can give using this same platform, which we'll get into in a moment, called ArcGIS Online. Then I've got another thing that I want to show. This is a story map now on a similar topic. This took me a little more time to build, but I oftentimes give presentations with story maps instead of slides, because in part I want people to see that, hey, if I can do it, you can do it. So in this case, I've got basically the same kind of a theme where I talk about geotechnologies and our massive open online courses, et cetera, some of which are live web pages, okay, and some of which are actually photographs or diagrams or maps. So this is a presentation that I actually give. And the nice thing about this is that it's online. So I can go to any place, anytime, right? You've all been to conferences like CAEE's conference, the NAAEE, and others, and I can just march up to any podium. As long as I'm connected to the web, I can go ahead and show this because it's online. As you can see here, I'm just using the Chrome web browser at the moment to pull this up. So that's nice. It's also nice that it's interactive. That's the nice thing about it. So if I'm talking about, world ecosystems, I want to look at these. Okay, what is an ecosystem? Oh, okay. And where am I teaching at the current time? And I can interact with this map. So it's not static. Nice. Okay. So the point is that you have a variety of ways at your fingertips to communicate, to teach with these maps. Okay, so a couple of advantages of using story maps in education. I've already touched on many of these, and I'm not going to just repeat everything that's in this slide, but I want to highlight one thing that I haven't talked about yet, and that is there are also good ways to assess students' work. So oftentimes in courses, for example, I'm usually teaching teachers, but I have them generate a story map, and then I create a short rubric that helps me to assess the story map. I just have them share with me and to their colleagues the URL for that story map, and then I can go in there and assess it. Did they tick all of the things that I wanted them to do, etc. So it's a nice way to assess faculty or student work. So let's say you're teaching a unit on, how about ecoregions of Colorado? And you say, okay, I want you to make a story map. It's got to have 4 slides or 4 frames in it, and I want you to share that with the class. And then teach, and then present with it. Give us a 5-minute presentation and use your story map in the class to present about the ecoregions of Colorado, or water quality in your city, or urban greenways in Greeley, or whatever the topic happens to be. Okay, now, how does this all come together, you might wonder? Well, the organization that I work for, Esri, Environmental Systems Research Institute, we created this platform called ArcGIS Online. And story maps are a part of that. So it didn't all just kind of get created overnight. This is a multi-year sort of effort. And the nice thing is that you've got a platform to publish maps, to create your own content and put it in these live web maps. And let me kind of bring it down to earth here. A web map is stored online, and it has the following look to it. So here is a web map for a certain cycling route. Now again, think outside the box here, folks. This could be a trail that you've just gathered data on your phone. You've gathered the track in even a fitness app, for example. There are other ways to gather the track, but this particular one is a cycling route I took after a geography conference in New York City. I've always wanted to bike over the George Washington Bridge and be way above the Hudson, you know, like Henry Hudson. Boy, that was awesome. If you're afraid of heights, I don't recommend it. It's very loud up there too, and you're right next to the traffic. But here's my web map just based on the GPS track from my, in this case, a GPS unit rather than my cell phone, but it could have been my phone as well. So I just mapped it here, and you can see that I've got different segments of the line showing where I cycled basically from Central Park all into New Jersey and back. All right, so that's good, but then what? Okay, here is a story map of the same thing. So this is a story map, and you can see that it has many of the components that just the plain web map had, but it also has additional functionality. For example, in this case, I've got the ability, and you have the ability as well, to look at it in 3D, okay? You can look at it in 3D. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, if I wanted to see the elevation, and you and I are from Colorado, right? Don't worry. This looks like it's super steep, but remember, this is New York, New Jersey. I mean, look at the elevations on the left side here. We're talking about hundreds rather than thousands of feet. But you can still get a sense for, as I cycled along, what was the profile. So picture again, you doing this for a trail, for example, in your nature center, or a field trip you took with your students. Another thing you might notice here is that I've actually got a theme inside the map. I've got the median age in there. So I wanted to see, for example, the median age, median income, and other census demographic variables that reflect the different neighborhoods as I explored them. Okay, so why is, for example, the Bronx younger than these neighborhoods over in New Jersey? And why is Queens younger than Staten Island, etc.? You could do that for Greeley or Denver or Fort Collins or any place in Colorado, for example. Okay, so that's a story map. And so what I'm getting at is that story maps are web mapping applications. The only reason why we call them story maps really is because, well, they are maps, but they're really apps. And it just doesn't sound as cool to call them story apps. So we call them story maps, but they're really web mapping applications. And there's 3 ways to make these things, folks. Method 1 is what we're going to use here in a moment. We're going to use those builder tools that I mentioned where it gives you basically a prompt. Okay, where are your photos? Where's your videos? Where are your maps? Stitch it all together. What kind of map do you want to make? Next, 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 finish. Then do you want to share it? Okay, share it. And then what else do you want to do with it? Do you want to embed it in your website, etc.? So that's the method we're going to use here today. There's other methods, though, that you might want to keep in mind for the future. We're going to start with the basics. Let me show you an example of a story map that's embedded in somebody's website. Okay, so this is Alaska Fish and Game. I like this one because they've done a nice job with not making it overly engineered. It's very simple, but the story here is, hey, we're in Anchorage. Guess what? There are bears. How do we live in harmony with these bears? Okay, so what do these bears do? In this case, you've got some what they call interesting behaviors. So one of the reasons why I wanted to show this map is that you can see that it's embedded inside alaska.gov. Look at the URL at the top of this web page. It's Alaska's Fish and Game website, but it's a story map inside their website. Ooh, so what if this is a story map embedded in your Weebly page, in your school's page, in your university's web page, in your nature center's page? So, for example, if we look at interesting behaviors, another reason why I wanted to show this is because, as you can see here, there's a pop-up, and in the URL here, there's actually a video. And because we're on the web here with our webinar, I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this, but let me just show you a 10-second piece of this. So here's the bear's snout. Okay, so there are cameras, right, in these bears. Every time I think I'm having a difficult day at work, I think, well, Joseph, at least you're not tagging bears with collars. So, leave that to the professionals, right? So anyway, there's some interesting behaviors. So the idea is to help the public understand how these bears cross roads, how they swim, how they interact with fellow bears, and then therefore how can we actually live with them in the same community. So it's a very effective use of story maps, and it's embedded in the Alaska Fish and Game. You can look at these other ones at some point, volcanoes, embedding audio in the Lakota language story map. That's actually one of mine. And so, okay, let's think about the audience here just for a moment. Clues for creating great story maps. This is what I like to think about. Just like when you go out in the field with your students, you don't just plunge out in the field and say, well, I guess we're going to collect some data today. right? You think about, okay, what units are we going to use? What are we going to collect? What instruments do we need, etc. Same thing with story maps, folks. What you want to do is you want to connect, you want to think about the audience. Who's going to be looking at this? Is it just a bunch of students? Is it some faculty? Is it visitors to your nature center, you know, et cetera, to your state park, and so on? And then you want to lead people in. You want to create a compelling experience if you're going to share it with especially with the public. Then your user experience should support the story. So the content should actually fit into your goals. And you also want to have these maps fairly simple and easy to read. Not a lot of complication. Also, remember, you're using the web, so you don't want to have 100 photographs that are 10 megabytes each, that type of thing. It's going to slow it down, right? So because you're on the web. And then keep it simple. So the very first one, this isn't actually my real mom, but think about your mom, your family members, right? You're not going to talk down to them, but you're not going to use a bunch of jargon to explain your story, right? You're going to be respectful. So let's go ahead and build one of these story maps right now. As I do that, I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment because I'm going to skip down to another thing here. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, let's go back here. And how are you folks doing? You seeing teachable moments with story maps?
There is one question, Joseph, if you want to answer it now.
Sure.
So the question comes about, one person just mentioned that they don't really see story maps come up in Google searches, and why would that be?
Yeah, because we'll talk about that. What you have to do with these, because they have a very long, as you may have seen in some of those URLs, alphanumeric, unless you tweet about it, blog about it, post it on Facebook, whatever, you have to tell people about them. And these long alphanumerics are a map ID. And that's actually good for several reasons. One of which is that, let's say you share your story map with the general public, and you think, oh, oops, I really didn't want to, and I've got some tweaks to make to it. Well, don't worry, exactly what you're saying. No one's going to stumble across these, again, unless you tell people about them, unless you, again, tweet about it, write an article about it, and refer to it as a URL. So you're not going to stumble across these too often, unless you know some keywords. The best place is to start with the Story Maps gallery. All right, so one more thing here, folks, and that is, let's think about 3 key points. First of all, the story maps available for use in education are rapidly expanding. This is a web mapping platform. Every time it evolves, it gets easier to use and more powerful. So the tools are wonderful, but don't get locked into thinking, I've got to memorize all this stuff. I got to memorize how to do all this. Well, no, there are plenty of help files, videos, etc. And hopefully by the end of the 5 minutes that it'll take me to lead you through creating one of these, you'll say, oh, I totally get that. I can do that. Exactly. So let's go ahead and build one of these. Let's build a map tour. So we're on halfway down here on our set of activities. Like I said, you will have access to this whole slide deck of mine. And so you'll be able to go through the other activities like building a story map journal and a side accordion and a tabbed that we won't have time here in the webinar to do. You can do that on your own. Just to refresh your memory though, the story map tour is that one that we looked at the very beginning at the San Luis Obispo Police Department. That's the story map tour, and that's the one we're going to build here right now. So I'm going to go through these steps here. I'm basically going to go into storymaps.arcgis.com. Now, one note about logging in. You notice it says log in there at step number 1. Now, to use story maps, you don't have to log into anything as long as the creator of the story map has shared it with the public. All you need is a web, a web browser and a connectivity, a web connectivity. So you need some sort of bandwidth. That's all you need. And again, tablet, phone, laptop, desktop, etc. So you don't need anything to log in to look at one of these. Now, to create one of these, though, you do need to log in, and that's because just like if you created a Google Doc or a piece of a photograph on Flickr, right? You need to park it somewhere. You need to park it online. You need to place it online. And in order to do that, you need an account. Now, how do you get an account? Well, there's 2 ways. is, especially for those of you that are in education, which I think is most of you, if you're in K-12, you actually have access to the K-12 program that my organization runs at Esri. And I'm going to type that into the chat box here right now. And that is the good news. The good news is that with that K-12 account, you have access, and so do your students, to all of the functionality that we're going to show here today in creating story maps. So if you create a school account, all your students can have access to these creating story maps, okay? If you're not at a school, if you're at a nature center, we also have a nonprofit program. And both the school and the nonprofit program have been around since 1992. So we haven't just like woken up yesterday and said, hey, I guess we should work with schools. No, we are very committed to your success. So both of those are 25-year programs. And another thing is if you're at a college or a university, you have access to Esri GIS technology, and that includes an ArcGIS online subscription. 99% of the universities and colleges in Colorado and beyond have such a thing. So it's just a matter of putting you in touch with a person that runs at your campus the ArcGIS online account and getting you access to it. Okay, so any one of those three will be great. If you want a little sandbox account that you can start playing around with, then go to developer.arcgis.com and go to the very bottom and say create free account. So that's 4 ways that you can get an account here. So I'm going to go and use my exact procedures here because time is running short. I'm going to go to storymaps.arcgis.com, and remember how we were in the gallery a little while ago? This time I'm going to go to apps because I want to create one of these. And I'm going to say create story. And then I'm going to pick an app. Now, if you didn't know what kind of story map you wanted, you could spend a little time here and click on Ask the Pros. And it'll guide you through, okay, if your goal is this, then this kind of story map might be the most appropriate. I know that I want to create a map tour, so I'm just going to go and create a map tour here. And it's going to say, okay, Joseph, now you got to log in. This is where you've got to log in because you are going to create content and it's going to be online. So story maps cannot point to your own local computer content. Does that make sense? You have to make sure that when you create these story maps that, okay, I'm going to use these photographs and they're going to be over here, and the web maps are all online and so on, okay? So that said, it cannot point to your C drive, your D drive, your Mac drive, right? It's got to be online. Create a map tour is what we're going to do, and I'm going to create one on the Esri Sustainable Campus Initiative. Now, most universities, colleges, and even some K-12 schools have some sort of sustainability initiative on their campus, right? And that's what we're going to tell the story of. The first thing that the map tour asks you is, hey, do you have photographs online? If so, pick one of these platforms. And if not, you can upload your own images right here at this time. Now, mine are already online to save time here in our webinar. So I'm going to go to my own publicly shared Picasa Web Google Plus account. And I'm going to choose an album in there called the Esri Sustainable Campus. So I've got these photographs in folders. Keep things simple, put them in folders so you can easily find them as I've done right here. Then I'm going to say import, and notice that all my photographs show up in their correct spot. Now, the reason why is because I took them with my phone, and I had my location-based services on my phone, right? So it captured the latitude and longitude from my GPS triangulated location. If yours are not located in their correct position for whatever reason, for example, if you took them with a regular camera with no GPS chip, or if you were in a heavily timbered area like in Washington State, or if you're in a canyon like, Grand Canyon or Black Canyon in the Gunnison in Colorado, or if you're in downtown Denver where there's a lot of tall buildings and your GPS signal is kind of compromised, you can drag these things to their correct location just by simply clicking on these little place markers and dragging them. But mine are all located in their correct position, so I'm going to go ahead and say import. And now I'm basically going to have the basics for my story map right away. So here, my first caption is going to be, okay, the title is going to be water pipe, and this is the intake for the non-potable water system on the Esri campus. Now this is in Redlands, California. And so I'm going to change the base map here in a moment, but I'm going to tuck aside the chat box here. So, okay, great. See, I can move these things around, and I can also go to, oh, okay, now I'm going to go to the next photograph, which is this big Cereus cactus, Cereus. It's actually the oldest thing on our campus, and part of the sustainability story is that that cactus, let's zoom in here a bit, was placed in such a way, our headquarters building was placed in such a way that the cactus was preserved, right? So we didn't interfere or disturb the cactus at all. We wanted to keep it thriving. Now, the other thing to note, and that's part of the story here, is that if you look at this, I'm going to change the base map to imagery with labels. You can change the base map. Now, you probably notice, oh gosh, this is Southern California. How do I know that? Well, that's the story I'm telling. I can zoom way out and I can see San Bernardino, Redlands, etc. I don't want to spend time doing that. But if you look at the campus, it's Southern California, but it has lots and lots of trees. It has 3,000 trees. The CEO of Esri is Jack Dangerman, and he's a landscape architect and grew up in his family's tree nursery. So like many of us on the webinar, probably all of us on the webinar, he's very passionate about living things. But yet this is Southern California, right? Doesn't get a lot of water. So the sustainability initiative here, the story that I'm going to tell is the initiative to bring the non-potable water to the campus so that all these beautiful trees, a variety of species, can actually be sustained. And so the street was dug up, that big pipe was put in so that these shrubs and trees could actually live and not be watered with treated water. So the nice part about that sustainability initiative is that the surplus water is given to the city of Redlands, California, and they use it to water their trees in their parks and on their median strips of boulevards. So it's a very nice story that I want to tell with this particular story map. Another part of that story, as you can see from the roof of all the buildings on our campus in California, is these solar panels. So that's another part of the story that I'm going to tell. I don't have time to tell the whole story here, but that's essentially it. So now you've got the ability to create, what did that take us? Maybe 2 minutes. It's going to take us about 10 minutes to put the captions in, and we're going to be done, folks. We're going to be done with the story map. Then I can share it, I can save it, I can share it with the public, I can just share it with my students, I can share it with a group of researchers, and more about that in some additional notes that are in my slides. But hopefully you're seeing that, oh, I totally get that. I totally get that. Now, one of the techie notes that I wanted to bring up here is as follows. How do you know, and this is the next things that we don't really have time to cover, but I have you change the base map. I rearrange the order of the photographs using the Organize tab, that I'm going to save it. And then I have you, if you continue with this, which I hope you will sometime in the next few days or weeks, you change one of the photos to a video that I filmed on the campus. And then the last thing I have you do is actually upload a track as I walked around the campus so you can see how that's done. Okay? So that's 3 different slides with 3 steps in it. We only went through the first one today as a group. But hopefully, even from that simple example, you see that, oh, I totally get that. I understand. And when you're done, it's going to look similar to this. You're going to have captions under each one of these photographs, and you're going to have 5 photographs. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that there's a couple of others that I want you to look at, that Lakota language one. Here's one called the Esri Scholars. Just ever so briefly, it's going to look exactly like the Esri Sustainable Campus story map that we just created together. In this case, we have a Young Scholars program where we invite people from all over the world, usually undergraduates and some graduate students, into our annual conference. And what I did here is exactly what we just did together. I put photographs, and the only thing that's a slight more advanced thing is that you can see that underneath each photograph, I actually have a live link to the students' poster that they presented at the conference, okay? So that's the only difference there. Cool. So that is one of the things I wanted to share. The other thing is that a couple of tech notes. First of all, again, like I said, you want to keep these pretty simple. And when we create a story map, you may wonder, ooh, where should I put my photographs? Well, again, you can upload them as you create them, or, and so for example, if we look at the story map that we were right in the middle of creating, this right here, if I want to say, hey, you know what, I want to add something, and I'm going to add a new point. Like, let's say I go out and with my students or my nature center constituents, and I go and revisit that place where we collected water quality data out in that pond. I'm going to add a new photograph and some new pH and dissolved oxygen, whatever else I've collected. So I can add it at this point. Now, notice that, again, the picture has to be online. So where do you put them? Do you put them in Flickr? Do you put them in Google Plus? Do you put them in, yes, all of those, all the above, those would work. Or if you didn't want to put them in one of those photo sharing sites, you could actually add them to ArcGIS Online, just like you have your maps. So there's a variety of choices here, but hopefully you're seeing that, you know what, I can totally do this. This is not that involved. Keep it simple for your first one, like I've done here. Maybe make one of your campus or some cool place you went last summer, or you know, something that's really of importance to you. Urban greenway. This is where I like to go cycling in my town, and here's how it was. Here's how the riparian zone was reclaimed from some old trash dump in the past. That type of thing. Keep it pretty simple with a couple photographs and maybe just one map, like I've done here. Once you do that, then I think you'll be ready to go on to the next thing that I've got in the slides, and that is this story map journal. I have you make one called Feeding the Planet. So it's all about sustainable agriculture. And there are 3 sets of slides here, again, step by step. So you can go through this and create a sustainable agriculture story map. Okay, so that is really accomplishing our goals. What is a story map? How can I use it? A little bit of a live demo on how I can create one of these things. So does anybody have any burning issues, questions, complaints? Because while you're thinking of those, I'm going to actually, yes. So let me go down to some of the resources. Continuing your learning. So there's a Story Maps blog, for example, and my colleagues on our Story Maps team post things in there regularly. We also have an education blog that I and my colleagues write for, and many times we do talk about, okay, we're teaching about story maps. There's some other things that you can see here. There's a Story Maps newsletter. I know you as educators, you have to kind of limit what is coming at you because you've got a lot of other things that you're juggling. But there is also a MOOC, a massive open online course called Do It Yourself Geo Apps, that runs several times every year. It's quite nice. It's free. It's rigorous. And this oftentimes comes up. So I'm going to show this, how to use photos in your story maps, maybe some best practices. So this is actually, I posted on our GeoNet community, which is our basically all things geotechnology, to have a networking and a discussion. But here are my photo guidelines. So how do I use Flickr? How do I use Google Photos? Can I use Dropbox? Can I use OneDrive? Can I use Google Plus, Google Drive, etc.? So these are my photo guidelines. So yes, to answer your question, Jennifer, there's no shortage of additional resources. But what I would do is I would start with the URL that we were looking at earlier, and that is this one right here, storymaps.arcgis.com. That is really the one-stop shop for first start with the gallery, kind of look around, see what you like, see what you might want to build, think about your own story, and then go to the apps and try building a map tour like we did. And then if you want to dig deeper, look at some of the tutorials there. That's really the only URL that you need to know. These other ones are, again, extending your learning, but they're all findable through this slideshow. And that reminds me, I need to, Lisa, show folks where this whole slide deck is. And that is right here. So I'm going to do this. Search, while you folks are thinking of questions, search the web for this string, and you will find this exact long URL. I'll also paste that in there too, so you don't even have to search. So when you go to that zone, this is a short essay of mine. And number 2 is what we covered today, introduction and advanced work with story maps. So here's slides with core content with short activities. That's exactly what I showed today, okay? So these maps in the gallery that we showed, that we just barely touched on it, folks. We just did a little bite-sized, gluten-free story map nugget, but there's lots more there. But anything that's on the gallery you can use, absolutely. So no permission required. However, I still think these story maps are a great way to teach students about being critical of data, because even though the ones in the gallery have been vetted, they've been looked at by our story maps team, they're by no means perfect, right? Mapping is an imperfect science to begin with, right? We have to abstract the world in its many layers and themes, right? So maps are inherently inaccurate, very useful for sure, but have that critical eye on the data. There might be some content there, or content you might find outside of the gallery that a 6th grade student made, right? And they may be really stellar 6th grade students, but again, did they research all of their sources? Can you trust it, et cetera, et cetera? So have a critical eye on the data and encourage your students to do the same thing. But yeah, no permission required. Feel free to use those. And also, I just encourage you all to, at some point, create your own and have your students create their own story maps. It's amazing what these students can do with these. I've seen some stellar examples, and I also have some that I can share. I actually have it in those slides, some that students actually created. Very cool. You folks are great for hanging out with us. I mean, what's not to love about doing, some mapping on a Wednesday afternoon? This is grand to have you aboard. All right, Lisa, I'm turning it over to you for the final slides.
Okay. Well, I don't have any other slides, but I just want to extend a huge thank you to you, Joseph. That was so exciting. I am pumped to create my story map, and I think it just has applications for everyone. And just to note, just something I wanted to pass along is, as you're creating those, as folks are creating those, we would love to have you share those across the Colorado EE listserv. If you're not part of that, I will send that in my follow-up email. Jennifer's giving us a thumbs up. So yes, as you create those, please share them. Show us how you're using the story maps. And again, I will send a follow-up email with the evaluation, and I will try to include all the links that Joseph included in the chat box, as well as the recording. So thank you again to Joseph. Thank you to all of our listeners and participants today, and for the good questions. And happy Wednesday and happy mapping.
Indeed. Thanks for your support, Lisa. You folks are great.
Have a great day, everybody.